Okay, so my topic will be about pre-ordering and whether or not you should pre-order a game and whether or not you should implement pre-ordering in your own game if you're making one. So first, I'll start off with what it is. Pre-ordering is analogous to seeing a movie before the first viewing, or that's not what I meant to say. Buying a movie ticket before the first viewing. You don't know exactly what the movie's like. The reviews haven't come out yet, but you want to see the first viewing. So usually the video game development company will give you some benefit for doing it, obviously because there is a risk you're taking when you're going to and buying a game before anyone else has played it. You don't know how it's going to be. So you have to wonder, why do companies give out stuff, right? It must be in their interest to have pre-orders going on, right? There's a couple of things. So firstly, it sets off the launch of the game. The launch of the game is, I think, important for the game, but not for the reasons that a lot of people think they are. It's important that you get a lot of people to buy your game initially for certain games only. For example, multiplayer games. If you have a dead community in a multiplayer game that's at least or mostly multiplayer, then you'll end up with not many people who are going to want to play the game because there's no one else to play with. So if you have a multiplayer game, you need a lot of people to hop on it as soon as possible, shorten queue times and stuff like that. And it'll keep people around and increase retention. It also can be important for other things like really just other community-oriented things like modding, for example, right? If a big part of your game is the mod support, you need people to actually mod things for the game. And until that happens, then the game is going to be in a worse state, I guess. Having a large amount of people so that hopefully you'll have enough people who can mod things and hopefully they'll be able to do it fast enough so they can kick off your game with the modding support. It also gives the developers a level of certainty. When they essentially receive a upfront amount of cash, and now they can plan accordingly for the future. How long do we want to continuously update this game? What kind of budget are we looking for in terms of our next game? I think this is where it differs a lot from movies, is that games are a continuously changing thing. Like, yeah, there are updates put to games, and like when you buy a game, oftentimes it's expected that with this money, not only are you going to receive the current product, but you're also going to receive updates on the current product that make the product better. It's very strange, and that's a whole topic for another video, but that's often expected. Like 99% of the time, it's expected unless the game's old, in which case it's already outlived its development cycle. These are all good things, I guess, for the company, but there are also nefarious reasons that they might want to do it, such as, well, really the only one I can think of at least, is preventing people from knowing what the game's going to be like before they buy it. Oftentimes, game reviewers, like the big news companies that do game reviews and whatever, they tend to receive early copies of the game, but they're not allowed to speak on it by contract until the game is released. What this does is it can create a lot of hype about it, like, oh yeah, this game's going to come out. I know stuff I'm not allowed to. You hear sometimes YouTubers say this, I got an early copy. I'll say like this ambiguous thing about it, doesn't really say anything because I can't break contract, and it sort of generates a lot of hype. Let the reviews get out early, but no one knows them until it comes out. And so that if you pre-order it, you're really going in blind. All you have is our trailers, which we know they're oftentimes deceiving or perhaps underwhelming in some cases. Yeah, and like the number one source for I'm sure for like determining whether you want a video game has to be YouTube, right? Not that many people will go to like Kotaku and like look at the reviews for like, I don't know, whatever game, be like, oh yeah, I now want this game. Look up some video of it because that's the best way of knowing. Unlike a movie where looking up a video of it is spoiling it. This is different. It's the fun is in doing it yourself, and you're only getting a small piece of it. So as long as I show no like story moments that are like spoiler intensive, then it's fine. Yeah, that's a potential negative for consumers. And that's why there are like some big examples I can think of, such as Cyberpunk 2077, which the trailers were vague. They didn't really tell you what you could do in the game, but it looked quite nice, I guess. And as we know, it really only looks that nice if you play with ray tracing on, which is about 2% of people. So if you pre-order the game, you got massively screwed. Obviously they didn't show the copious amounts of bugs that were in the game. They're not going to show that in the trailer. You have no way of knowing. There are no reviews out yet. It's really a black box, and you just chose to buy it, and you got screwed over. You can similar thing happened with No Man's Sky, right? It was a lack of features in the game. There were a lot of things that were sort of promised, sort of taken out of context. people played the game and they're like, wait, these things aren't actually in the game because they had no way of knowing whether it was in the game or not. They just had to trust the company. At least in these two circumstances, I think in most circumstances, it's not usually ill intent by the game developers. I think it's just negligence. I think they intended to put these things in the game. They intended it to be like this, but it just couldn't end up that way due to time constraints, which I think I said this before. You should not constrain time on a game, usually. You can give yourself a range, but giving yourself a hard deadline like Cyberpunk did is pretty bad, as as we've seen. The game just was released in a unfinished state. So what's in it for the customers? You get to play the game early. You get to play as soon as it came out. I mean, is this really a plus side? Can you really not wait 3 days it takes for people to release the YouTube videos on it? I think this is a...
No, I cannot.
I don't think this really makes any sense. If you can't wait like 3 days, realistically, it's not 3 days. Realistically, you just wait for like 8 hours or something like that. And someone's going to have uploaded a video of the game. Maybe if you want to wait for your favorite YouTuber, give it a week, right? If you can't wait a week, I mean, I think you're a lost cause. Your spending habits are certainly interesting, I think.
Do you think any of that has to do with like the age of people that tend to buy pre-orders? Like maybe younger folks tend to buy pre-orders. I actually have no idea if that's true or not.
Yeah, I have no idea what the demographic is. I wonder. I don't think so. I remember when Cyberpunk 2077 was coming out, people were like, "Oh yeah, I'm getting my vacation for this week when like Cyberpunk is coming out, so I can play the game." I'm like, dude, you're kidding me, right? Like even before it came out, I didn't know that the game was going to be like that bad. You know what I'm saying? I just like it's probably not going to be as good as you think it's going to be. For a vacation from your work to play this game, like probably not, but maybe, right? And it was even worse than I imagined, and like. So I don't know. Maybe that was a minority of people, and it's mostly like children doing it. I'm not too sure. That's definitely an interesting point.
For reference, was this game like a complete failure on its release?
Oh yeah, it's definitely one of the worst games like released by AAA studio in that year. It was insanely buggy. The gameplay wasn't particularly interesting. The game didn't really look that great unless you're ray tracing, which we know not many people have the hardware to do that. So, yeah, it was a astounding failure.
let me describe to Ben the hype that went along with this game. I don't follow gaming news that much, but like I just kept seeing references randomly. The Tesla Cybertruck started like that's when I noticed it, because the Cybertruck's font, like branding, matched the font for the game Cyberpunk 2077 on purpose to get they knew their audience for the Cybertruck. You know, who follows Elon around, and they knew they probably also follow Cyberpunk 2077. I play a game called Planet Coaster. It's like one of my staple games, my few staple games that I play to relax. And it's a coaster building game, and there are some channels on YouTube that are Planet Coaster oriented. And all of a sudden, they were featuring like a whole hour to coasters themed after Cyberpunk 2077. This was months. You don't understand. Planet Coaster theme to the degree that they were doing would take hundreds of hours. Like, not even an exaggeration. Hundreds of hours to essentially make a totem of their undying devotion to Cyberpunk 2077, a game they've never played or seen, and only seen some few videos from. And then the game comes out, and it barely even works then. It barely even functions. That's the failure we're talking about.
Yeah, that seems to drive a pretty poor point for pre-orders. But let's continue going and see what the advantages are for consumers. So for consumers, yeah, as I said before, they get to play the game early, but that's really not a big deal. You often get the game cheaper. So game dev studios often say if you pre-order the game, you'll get it like 10% off or something like that. Recently, it's been like, since the standard for pricing has gone up to $70 for you can have it for $60 if you pre-order it. And okay, that's a fair incentive. I mean, $10 for that much risk, it's odd, but it's possible, and I'll get to that when that makes sense. So another thing is also that players often get some fancy things for pre-ordering. So a lot of times there's some in-game content that they'll get. Maybe, I don't know, they'll like start like, and let's say it's a game with cars in it that you have to unlock. They'll like by default have a few cars unlocked to play with or whatever. I think this is mostly like a trick. Like, this isn't actually necessarily good. This could be bad because, right, there's an optimal way that the game is meant to be played, right? If you're giving people stuff from the get-go, what you're saying is like, either you're saying that is not the optimal way to play because we didn't give everyone else the thing at the start because we know they're going to have more fun not having that at the start, or you said we're only giving you the optimal thing and we gave everyone else a worse game intentionally. It's very odd. It's sketchy that people will give people things pre-ordering. You may actually be losing out by spending money early, which is like, if that, I would much prefer it if you just said I'm giving everyone else a worse game. Like, I think it's very insulting to say like, take the risk and here's badness. And I think it might not be evident why it is that you could lose by gaining some in-game content. It's because games are, you have a challenge to the game, right? If you get some like OP like car at the start of a racing game, what's the point anymore? You've screwed up the whole balance of the game. There's no more tension anymore. You're just winning races left and right without having to put in much work. Yeah, I'm obviously not going to do the best car in the game. That's an exaggeration. But, they'll do something similar to a lesser degree. If it's something like cosmetic or something like that doesn't really affect the game, then it's the same at the end of the game. At the end of the day, it's more or less the same, and it doesn't really matter in that case. But usually I find that it's something that's actually like substantial, something that actually changes the game. To recap, the pros of having pre-orders is that the games have a bigger launch, which can be good for having a greater starting community, which can really propel the game. Players can get a cheaper game. Players can get the best version of the game if that's what the game developers are doing. The cons are that if you don't pre-order, you're sort of getting told that you're getting a worse game, or the players might be getting deceived and they're actually getting a worse game if they're pre-ordering. And you really don't know what it is that you're getting. So, is it good for the consumer, at least? It sort of depends, right? So, depends. Do you trust the company? Are you actually getting the best version of the game? And how much do you value your money, pretty much? So, essentially, all it is like simple like cost-benefit analysis, right? What are the risks? How much money are you putting into it? What is your expected gain? Like, that's not an easy thing to calculate because you're not dealing with concrete numbers, right? Like, what do you expect to gain? Like, even if you could like pinpoint, say, the amount of hours, you also have to factor the quality of the hours and stuff like that, which you can't know because you're pre-ordering a game which has no reviews yet. So you literally have no idea. Well, it gets mostly now because you really have no idea what you're going for. But the company's reputation may save you there. Using Cyberpunk as an example again, the prior games that the game development studio CD Projekt Red made were they're known for the Witcher series, The Witcher 1 through 3. Those games are also buggy. I don't know why anyone expected anything different. I think it's a whole new level of bugginess, but you must know, based on the prior games, that the games are going to start buggy and they're going to get better. So you should buy it later, not now. They're not in a good state now. I don't know why you would expect this pattern to be different, considering they never released a game that was not buggy at the start. And take No Man's Sky also as an example. The game company that made that, called Hello Games, they actually they did release, I believe it's 3 games prior, but they were nowhere even near the scope of this game. This game is like much larger in scope. And you can also, the things that were being promised didn't look possible within the time they were given. I don't want to like totally destroy Hello Games. They're like, if you look into the situation, it's not as clear as like they just duped a bunch of people and took money and ran away. It's a bit malicious, I guess, and more of an honest mistake in a way. Even though that might be hard to believe that you could have made a mistake that bad, but I think they get a lot more hate than they deserve. Would I buy a pre-ordered game from Hello Games? Like, again, knowing this, even though I think the company is like a relatively good company, no. Not at all. Their actions speak for them, right, themselves, right? They may have fixed the game, right, but at the start it wasn't good, and so I think you may have to expect that with upcoming games until they prove themselves as not doing that. Essentially, should you allow pre-orders for your games as the developer? Also depends. So one, please don't deceive your players. That is, if you're having pre-orders and you're doing this to deceive your players, just don't do that. Like, that would be great, right? Do you want to limit the best version of the game to the initial buyers? As I said before, if it's a cosmetic thing, it doesn't really matter that much. But if you're actually just giving a better version of the game to initial buyers, is it really that important? So people might say, yeah, I need that pre-order data. I need to know who's buying my game very quickly so I can, do things with marketing and whatever to get people to continue buying my game. And I also need that community to grow. I think the community aspect is sort of reasonable, but I think like initial gain and that feeling of safety that you get from a bunch of pre-orders is sort of not well founded, because it turns out that a lot of games tend to make most of their money not on the first day. I know that it may look like that if you look at a graph, and it's like a huge spike on the first day for like the total amount of players of the game, right? But if you combine all those little bumps throughout the entire game's lifespan, you can be talking about like a game that's 10 years old that managed to rake in like crazy amounts of money like within like the last 5 years, for example. Because people just, especially if it's not a multiplayer game where the community is dead, right? Like, for example, no one's buying like Battlefield Hardline. No one plays that game, right? There's like no servers. But if it's like a single player game, like, I don't know, take Crysis, right? Crysis is really old. There are definitely still people buying it. I'm sure Crytek is still making money off of Crysis. It's slow, but over time, like, you're gonna make a lot of money. And I think this is a overlooked point. When they're starting their game dev journey and they release their first game and they look at the pre-order, or not necessarily the pre-orders, but they look at like the first week or two, and they might see a big spike or whatever, and the retention is really bad, and it drops off, and they're like, oh, well, so the game was sort of a failure. But we don't realize that you now have passive income. You don't have to do anything else. You're just gonna make money now. Like, the game's gonna sit on the store. People are still gonna buy it. You don't even have to market it. Like, people will tell each other word of mouth. And it might make the rounds on Steam using like Discovery Queue, for example, which is not the greatest for finding games that are like small, but it's possible. And if you want to, you can still put a bit of budget into marketing over time and get that continued increase in player base to grow. So I don't think it's really the biggest deal to get a ton of people at the start, unless it's, of course, as I said before, a multiplayer game. If you are starting out and you don't have a lot of people playing a multiplayer game, that is kind of an L. But perhaps you shouldn't start making a multiplayer game. I think that's just a significantly more risky idea. I mean, if you have a good idea and you think it's possible and you've done your research, then go for it. But it may end up being a waste of time in the end. I think that's pretty much my entire point.
Just make good games.
Make good games. You probably don't need to have pre-orders. You really shouldn't buy pre-orders, probably 90% of the time.
If you bought one and you got burned, it's your fault and it's no one else's.
Yeah. It's really
Unless
crazy.
you were lied to. That's the only thing. Yeah.
Oh, like a game that I could consider pre-orders for is like the NBA 2K series, right? It's going to be the same thing more or less every single, or really in most sports games. They're really going to be the same thing for the most part every single time, with like some random occasional added like game mode or something like that, or like they'll update the players. You know what you're getting into when you get the game. There really is nothing like. It'd be very surprising if the game got worse. It'd be pretty disturbing. So pre-ordering a sports game probably makes a decent amount of sense. You can get it cheaper, and maybe you can get some good bonuses that are actually good. So yeah. Oh, also I never mentioned, don't pre-order Battlefield 2042.
That is the photo on the screen. Yeah.
Yeah. I just looked at the screen. I was like, oh yeah, that's kind of a big deal. And, Battlefield 4 launch is pretty bad. You remember that, right? Like, don't be trying to get on launch and be like, oh, boo-hoo, I got a bad game. It's like, wow, I didn't see that one coming. Like, may very well be good. Probably not definitely. So yeah.
Battlefield launches don't tend to be good. Yeah. So I guess we'll wrap it up. Cool. So first off, shout out to Steph, my wife, for essentially now becoming the producer of this podcast, essentially. So we're going to call her producer wife around here. And so shout out to her for editing these, now taking over like the scheduling of the releases and all that kind of stuff. So yes, thank you very much. And the last thing I'll say is if you like this, like the post, follow us, subscribe, all the things that I usually say, do them all because they're all great. One thing that we really want to hear is feedback all the time, and we'd love to see more people around live with us. These are things that we really do think will help the channel bloom. Hopefully we can get some interviews up in here, at some point. To sort of mix up the content, but tell us what you would like to see, because that's what we're interested in. And so with that, this podcast will go live in 3 different parts. We sort of split them up into our individual parts when we do these kinds of episodes, and they'll launch throughout the week as we edit them on audio only and video. In the meantime, if you want to see all of this in its live glory, join us on Locals. That is mixedmedia.locals.com, mixedmedia.locals.com. It's free. It's just a community. Join the community. I post the stream as soon as we go, as soon as I take it down, and you'll be able to see us there. So enjoy your July 4th weekend and all the other jazz, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.